Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to talk all about embroidery stitches. Embroidery is a super fun craft to learn how to do, and it's really pretty easy to get started. Once you know just a few stitches, you'll be able to make all kinds of things. And in this video, I'm going to teach you some of my favorite embroidery stitches. These also happen to be the stitches that we use in our Plum Diddle hand embroidery kits. So if you're working on one of those right now, come back to this video anytime if you need a refresher on how to do a stitch. Of course, before I go over any stitches, I want to first talk about how to thread your needle. Start by cutting a piece of your embroidery floss about 24 inches long. And then you can separate your embroidery floss into the number of strands that you want to use. Embroidery floss is made up of 6 strands of thread, but people usually don't use all 6 strands at once. In this video, I'm going to be using 3 strands of floss, but you can separate your embroidery floss into more sections if you're doing a super delicate detail or if you just prefer that look. Now go ahead and grab your needle threader and put the loop from the needle threader through the eye of the needle. Run a little bit of embroidery floss through that loop on the threader, and then use the threader to pull the floss back through the eye of the needle. Once you have that, you'll just want to tie a little knot in the end of your string so that we can get started on our stitches. The first stitch we're going to talk about is a super useful one called the back stitch. The back stitch is a super strong stitch, and it's a great one to use anytime you need the appearance of a solid line. First, make a simple stitch by bringing your needle up through the back of the fabric and then down through the front of the fabric. That little stitch that you just made is going to be the same length that you try to match the rest of your stitches to. On your next stitch, bring your needle up through the back of the fabric, but bring it up so it's skipping a stitch length. Then place your needle on the exact point where your previous stitch ended and pull it through. In this way, it's kind of like you're stitching backwards because you're bringing the needle back to your previous stitch. Once you have the hang of that, you can use this little trick for the back stitch to go a little faster. And the way to do that is to point your needle on the spot where your previous stitch ended, bring the needle underneath the fabric, skipping a stitch length, and pull the needle up through so that you're pulling the thread through both places you stitched through at once. Just repeat that same process until you've filled in your entire line. Next is going to be the running stitch, which is a very simple stitch that gives you that cute dotted line look. All you have to do for this stitch is move your needle up through the back of the fabric, move over 1 stitch length, bring your needle down through the front of the fabric, move over 1 stitch length, and then up through the back of the fabric again. Just repeat that. You can do this with long stitches or short stitches depending on the design and what you prefer. Now let's talk about the chain stitch. The chain stitch is great for creating a thick textured line, and it also looks really great with bold text. To start the chain stitch, bring your needle up through the back of the fabric and then put it down at the same point that you brought your needle up. Pull the thread through, but not all the way because we're going to want this little loop to stay there. That loop is what we're going to make our next stitch into. So bring your needle up through the back of the fabric 1 stitch length over, making sure that you're going through the loop that you just made. As you pull the needle up, you'll notice the loop will start to tighten, and then bring your needle down through that same point, also making sure you're going through the loop. Repeat that process along the entire project, just making sure that every time you make a loop, you're starting it inside the previous loop. Okay, now let's talk about French knots. French knots are my absolute favorite stitch to do. They make these little raised dots, and I just think they're so cute. To make a French knot, pull the needle up through the back of the fabric with your dominant hand, and then hold the string at the bottom with your non-dominant hand. Bring your needle down by the thread and wrap the thread around the needle at least twice. Then carefully turn your needle and point it down to the fabric where you first brought your needle up. Pull the needle back down through the fabric, letting the French knot tighten as you go down. If you want a larger French knot, you can wrap the thread around the needle 3 or 4 times. Next is the satin stitch. This stitch is great for filling in any larger shapes that you have, and it has a really cool smooth finish. To do the satin stitch, you're just going to make parallel lines across the shape that you're trying to fill in. A couple of things to keep in mind with the satin stitch are first that you want to be careful that you're really reaching the edge of the shape that you're trying to fill in. That's going to help it look crisp. The other important thing is to make sure that your stitches are really truly parallel to each other. You can do this stitch on any shape. Just make sure that you pay attention to that outside border and keep going until the whole shape is filled in. Next is the straight stitch. The straight stitch is very similar to the satin stitch, but the difference is that you don't want to do your stitches right next to each other like you do with the satin stitch. Instead, leave a little gap between each one. You can make your stitches long or short and keep them very neat and parallel, or make them a little messier for a whimsical way of filling in a shape. But however you choose to do it, it's a great way to fill in a shape without having to make too many stitches. Okay, now let's talk about the tree stitch. The tree stitch is basically a simple way to create branches or stems using just the straight stitch. Even though it might not warrant its own category, we still included it because we utilize the tree stitch in lots of our kits. To make the tree stitch, make one longer stitch, then make several shorter stitches that connect to that longer stitch. This is a cute way to fill up space or add just another detail in your design. Next, I want to go over the lazy daisy stitch. In this stitch, you make loops similar to the chain stitch, and together the loops make this really cute flower. To do the lazy daisy stitch, bring your needle up at the center of wherever you want your flower to be, and bring it back down through that same point. Leave a little bit of a loop there, and then make a small stitch at the edge of where you want your flower petal to be. When you're making that stitch, bring the needle up through the inside of the loop and then down on the outside of the loop so it traps the loop in place. Repeat this for as many petals as you want your flower to have. The last stitch I want to talk about is the woven rose stitch. This is definitely the most complicated of the stitches I'm going to talk about today, but it's still a stitch that's very easy to execute and the effect is super impressive. Start by making 5 stitches, all coming out from a center point. This is what we're going to do our weaving on. Once you have those in place, then bring your needle up through the center of those 5 stitches, and then we're going to use our needle to weave around this circle. To do that, we'll bring our needle over one stitch and under the next one, then over that one and under the next one. We'll just keep repeating that over-under pattern until we've got stitches all the way out to the edge. So just be patient and follow the pattern. As you do this, you should start to see a woven texture appear. When you have a nice full rose, just poke your needle in through at the very edge of the rose and pull it down through the back. And there you have it. That is how to do all of these stitches. I hope this video was helpful to you. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions, and let us know what you would like to see next. Bye-bye!